Tonight, a story that could change the trajectory of global power. Because what just happened between Washington and Moscow isn't just about plutonium. It's about power, paranoia, and the return of something we swore we'd left behind, the nuclear arms race. Russia has just withdrawn from its plutonium disposition agreement with the United States. Yes, the very deal designed to ensure that both nations would destroy their Cold War stockpiles of weapons-grade plutonium. Gone, torn apart. And the timing couldn't be more dangerous. Let me break this down, because the implications are staggering. When that deal was signed back in the early 2000s, it symbolized hope. A step away from annihilation. Both sides agreed to dispose of 34 tons of plutonium, enough for 17,000 nuclear weapons. 17,000. But now that promise lies in ashes. The Kremlin says it no longer trusts Washington, that the United States, quote, has not lived up to its obligations. Their accusation that the US didn't actually destroy its plutonium, but merely stored it. And that America's sanctions, missile deployments in Europe, and what Moscow calls aggressive policies have made the agreement meaningless. In other words, Russia is done playing nice. And let's be clear, this isn't just a bureaucratic move. This is geopolitical theater, a warning, a signal from Vladimir Putin that the post-Cold War honeymoon is officially and violently over. The world may not have noticed the crack of the starting pistol, but make no mistake, a new race may already be underway. Let's pause for a moment. For decades, treaties were the thin thread holding the nuclear world together. The INF Treaty gone, the Open Skies Treaty gone, and now the Plutonium Disposition Agreement gone. One by one, the pillars of nuclear restraint have been dismantled. Think about that. Every safeguard, every mechanism meant to stop a miscalculation or misunderstanding between the world's two largest nuclear powers is eroding, and what replaces it? Distrust, militarization, silence. Where dialogue once stood, in Moscow, officials described this move as necessary response to hostile US actions. But behind the diplomatic language lies something far more sinister. Preparation. Russia is modernizing its nuclear arsenal, not quietly, not reluctantly, but proudly. Hypersonic missiles, autonomous underwater drones, tactical nukes, all designed to bypass American defenses. Meanwhile, the United States, under increasing domestic pressure, is also expanding its nuclear modernization program. Billions being poured into new ICBMs, stealth bombers, and warhead updates. Each side insists it's only responding to the other. Each claims to be defending peace by preparing for war. History, it seems, has a dark sense of irony. Remember the 1960s, the Cuban Missile Crisis? Two nations staring into the abyss. For a brief, fragile moment, humanity understood the cost of brinkmanship. And for decades after, diplomacy, however imperfect, kept that doomsday clock from striking midnight. But here we are again. 60 years later, the language of deterrence is back. And the question isn't if a new arms race is coming, it's whether it's already begun. Now, let's talk about the real reason behind Russia's move, because it's not just about plutonium, it's about leverage. For Putin, every withdrawal, every escalation, every symbolic treaty torn apart is a message to Washington: we're not afraid of your sanctions, we're not afraid of your alliances, we will not play by your rules anymore. This is about rewriting the global order, and the timing is no accident. The world is fracturing, the Middle East is burning, China is rising, America is distracted. And in that chaos, Russia sees an opportunity to reclaim its seat at the head of the nuclear table. What makes this even more chilling is how quietly it happened. No press conference, no emergency meeting at the UN, just a notice signed, sealed, and sent. And just like that, one of the few remaining arms control agreements between the two powers, gone. In the official decree, Putin accused the United States of unfriendly actions and demanded that the US reverse sanctions, reduce military presence in NATO countries, and compensate Russia for damages. Yes, you heard that right. Russia is holding nuclear disarmament hostage to political concessions. That's not negotiation. That's nuclear blackmail. Let that sink in. Because once nuclear weapons become bargaining chips again, the rules of the game change. Suddenly, treaties don't mean safety. They mean leverage. And when global superpowers start playing poker with nuclear chips, the stakes are civilization itself. Now, the White House calls this move deeply regrettable. The State Department insists that the US remains committed to non-proliferation. But commitment means nothing if trust is dead. And right now, that trust is not just fractured, it's radioactive. Here's what makes this story terrifying. The line between deterrence and provocation is razor thin. One missile test too close to a border, one radar misreading, one cyber attack misattributed. That's all it takes. And unlike the Cold War, today's world is far less stable. More nuclear actors, more autonomous systems, more unpredictable leaders, and fewer guardrails. So when Russia says it's done destroying plutonium, it's not just halting a technical process. It's declaring we're back in the game. But ask yourself, is the United States ready for that game? Because while Washington debates budgets and elections, Moscow is building. Building new silos, new warheads, new delivery systems, and new narratives. They've reframed this not as aggression, but as defense. Russia, they say, is protecting itself from Western encirclement, a victim-turned-warrior. It's a narrative that sells well, not just at home, but across the global South. In a world increasingly skeptical of American hegemony, Putin's defiance plays like a symphony. He isn't just testing missiles, he's testing global patience. And so far, no one's calling his bluff. But here's the question we should all be asking: what happens when that bluff turns real? Because this isn't just about US-Russia relations. It's about the entire nuclear ecosystem. When the two biggest players start tearing up agreements, smaller nations take note. If Washington and Moscow won't disarm, why should Tehran? Why should Pyongyang? Why should anyone? We're entering a world where nuclear restraint looks increasingly optional. And once that perception takes hold, proliferation becomes inevitable. Remember, treaties aren't just ink on paper, they're psychological anchors. They reassure the world that the powerful are being watched, restrained, accountable. Take that away, and what's left? Fear. And fear breeds arms races. Now, to many in the West, this looks like a predictable Russian tantrum, a symbolic withdrawal. But to those who've studied the Kremlin's playbook, it's a pattern. Step 1, denounce the West's hypocrisy. Step 2, break the agreement. Step 3, offer a new framework, one that shifts control toward Moscow. And each time, the West struggles to respond because the moral high ground doesn't protect you from a hypersonic missile. So where does this end? Experts say this could lead to a new arms buildup unseen since the 1980s. Billions of dollars redirected to nuclear programs. New generations of scientists designing weapons once thought obsolete, and a world where nuclear deterrence once again defines foreign policy. But there's something deeper here, something far more psychological. This move reveals how fragile our so-called peace really is. For decades, we told ourselves we'd evolved past the brinkmanship of the Cold War, that we'd learned, that we were rational, that nuclear war was unthinkable. And yet, all it took was one stroke of a pen to remind us how quickly humanity forgets. Russia's withdrawal isn't the start of a new chapter. It's the reopening of an old wound, one we never truly healed. And maybe that's the most dangerous part. Because if history is any guide, the world never stumbles into nuclear conflict intentionally. It drifts there, slowly. one misstep at a time, and right now, we're drifting. There's a chilling line from a Soviet general recorded during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He said, "We will sit in the ashes of our victory." That's the paradox of nuclear power. It gives you dominance you can never use. Deterrence that collapses the moment it's tested. So here we are, decades later, standing on the edge of that same paradox. Two nations armed to the teeth, bound by pride, fueled by distrust, and playing with the most destructive force ever created. The only question now is who blinks first. But what if this time no one does? But what if this time no one does? Because here's the truth: deterrence only works when both sides are still listening, when both believe that the other is rational enough not to cross the line. But what happens when communication breaks down, when suspicion becomes policy, when silence replaces diplomacy? Right now, back channels that once connected Washington and Moscow are almost non-existent. The hotline between the Pentagon and the Russian Defense Ministry, the very line designed to prevent misunderstandings, has gone eerily quiet. The ambassadors who used to negotiate face to face now trade barbed statements through press releases. And every time one side blinks, the other reads it as weakness. This isn't just a failure of diplomacy, it's a failure of imagination. Because both nations are preparing for a conflict they claim they don't want, while taking steps that make it increasingly likely. Russia conducts nuclear readiness drills. The US rehearses strategic bomber missions over Europe. Each side says it's defensive, but in the logic of deterrence, every defense looks like a threat. And while leaders play this deadly chess game, ordinary people are left wondering, how close are we to midnight this time? The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists says the doomsday clock stands at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been. That's not a metaphor anymore. That's a measurement of fear. Consider the psychology of this moment. Russia, cornered by sanctions and isolation, turns inward. The Kremlin sells a narrative of defiance. They tried to weaken us, but we will emerge stronger. It fuels nationalism, pride, and paranoia all at once. In America, meanwhile, a divided Congress debates military spending while public trust in institutions crumbles. Both societies are distracted, divided, and exhausted. And that's when mistakes happen, not in moments of tension, but in moments of fatigue. What makes this new standoff different from the old one is technology. Artificial intelligence guiding targeting systems, autonomous drones patrolling oceans, cyber units capable of shutting down nuclear command networks. In the past, deterrence was human, slow, calculated, deliberate. Today, algorithms make split-second decisions. A glitch, a misread signal, a false alarm, and the machines won't hesitate. We've seen this before. In 1983, a Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov saw warning lights indicating a US nuclear launch. He could have reported it. He could have triggered retaliation, but he didn't. He hesitated. He thought. He trusted his instincts and saved the world. But what happens when that decision is no longer human? When machines make the call before a man like Petrov can even intervene? And this is what Russia's withdrawal symbolizes. It's not just about the end of one treaty, it's about the end of human restraint in nuclear politics. A shift toward automation, escalation, and cold calculation. But look deeper, and you'll see fear on both sides. Fear of irrelevance, fear of weakness, fear of being outmaneuvered. For Russia, the fear of being encircled by NATO. For the United States, the fear of losing global dominance. Two empires haunted by their own pasts, desperate to prove they still matter. There's an old saying in diplomacy, when elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. Today, that grass is the rest of the world. Nations caught between superpowers are already choosing sides or arming themselves to survive the fallout. China quietly expands its warhead count. India and Pakistan race to modernize their arsenals. North Korea watches from the sidelines, learning every lesson. Each act of defiance by Moscow gives justification to others. And as these nuclear shadows grow longer, global institutions look smaller. The United Nations calls for dialogue, but its words echo into the void. NATO holds emergency meetings, but its deterrence depends on the very nuclear weapons it claims to control. The architecture of peace, built over decades, is buckling under its own hypocrisy. Imagine for a second a world where the next crisis unfolds not in Europe, but in the Pacific. A Chinese naval blockade, a US response, Russian submarines on patrol. 3 nuclear powers, one miscommunication away from catastrophe. That's not a distant scenario. That's the world we're sleepwalking into. And yet, no one seems truly alarmed. Maybe because fear fatigue has set in. Maybe because we've lived under the nuclear shadow so long, it's become invisible. The mushroom cloud has turned into a metaphor, not a memory. We scroll, we watch, we shrug. But history doesn't care about apathy. Somewhere in a Russian bunker, a general signs off on another weapons test. Somewhere in Washington, a contractor gets approval for a new missile budget. The cycle continues, quiet, methodical, inevitable. No one hears the ticking until it's too late. And so we come to this, not an ending, but a warning, because history doesn't repeat itself. It waits. It waits for arrogance. It waits for ignorance. It waits for that one moment when leaders forget what the last mushroom cloud taught us. Russia's withdrawal from the Plutonium Deal isn't just a diplomatic move. It's a mirror. It shows us the fragility of our so-called order, the illusion of control in a world that can destroy itself in 20 minutes flat. The real danger isn't the number of warheads. It's the loss of wisdom, the erosion of fear, the normalization of the unthinkable. Once the world trembled at the thought of nuclear war. Now, we treat it like background noise. But apathy is how empires die, not with a bang, but with the quiet acceptance that the bang will never come. So the question tonight isn't whether a new arms race is inevitable. The question is, who will have the courage to stop it before it starts? Because if history has taught us anything, it's this: when nations play with fire, it's never the generals who burn. It's the world that turns to ash.